Hey, this is David. Just doing that 20% return on investment in poker. Gonna share this on Facebook and play a video in the background. Um,
This moment, this moment is one of personal pride and gratification, yet one cannot help but reflect the deep sadness that we feel over the troubles and the violence which have erupted regrettably and tragically in the streets of this great city, and for the personal injuries which have occurred.
Protesters demonstrated outside. Hubert Humphrey, longtime Minnesota senator and unsuccessful candidate for president in 1968, is the focus of this week's Contenders program. And we're live from Minnesota's History Center. Mick Coet is the documentarian of Hubert Humphrey's life, just finished a documentary last year. We're standing in the middle of an exhibit that the History Center has put on about the tumultuous year of 1968. So to start our discussion about Hubert Humphrey, I want you to set the stage for people. As 68 dawned, this country was in an uproar about the Vietnam War. Set the stage.
Well, the Vietnam War had been running for a long time at that point, probably 15 years. And the Tet Offensive at the end of January really set the stage for the year because it was obvious to everyone that the war was not being won. And the North Vietnamese reached all the way to the American embassy in Saigon. President Johnson's approval ratings just plummeted. And McCarthy had been in the race in the fall. Bobby Kennedy was joining the race. And it was just utter chaos at that point. And then, of course, right after President Johnson resigned in the 29th of March, 3 days later, Martin Luther King was assassinated. So the beginning of that first part of the year was a terrible chaos.
It was a year when people who were alive were turning on their radios every morning to wake up, and there seemed to be another huge story every day. We're going to try and tell some of that story in the context of Hubert Humphrey's campaign for president. We'll be here for 2 hours, and as we're here, we'll learn more about the history of the times and the biography of Senator Humphrey. And partway into it, we'll begin taking your telephone calls so you can be part of our discussion here.
that's my buddy right there. He still owes me 80%.
What's different about the wars we fight today and the Vietnam War is the draft. So this was real, in a sense, for American families in a very different way than the professional army we have today. Will you talk about that?
Sure. The draft was really the point at which the protest really started when the draft was instituted, and it really now people have a choice if people want to enter the military or if they're against the war. 80%. They can stay away. In those days, there was no choice. You either went to Canada or you did something to get out of being drafted, and that's really what caused the protest. Because and the other part of that is that people weren't even able to vote until they were 21, but they were being drafted at 18, so they couldn't even vote the people out of office that were running the war. So that's probably the biggest difference.
So is it fair to say that every American family had a personal connection to this war in one way or the other?
I would say pretty much, and some had, two. They had someone who went to the war and someone who was against it in the same family. In fact, Lyndon Johnson, Robert McNamara, his own kids were against the war, and he had kids anti-war protesters stay at his house. Stay at his house during that. So there was, families were broken over it, much like the Civil War, I guess.
The other thing that people should understand that made this real in a way that hadn't in wars fought earlier was television. Mm-hmm. Television was bringing it into people's living rooms every night. Will you talk about the effect of that?
Well, it was wide open because nobody had really done any kind of television wasn't restricted. It was all brand new, and so nobody in the administration or anyone else had any control over it. So the journalists were just going out there and getting whatever they found, and we don't have that now. It's pretty much more controlled in the battlefield. So we were seeing things in the living room that you wouldn't see now. I mean, actual battle scenes and people being wounded and that kind of thing. And it had a profound effect on the country. And there was another reason why people came out against the war was they started seeing it all the time on TV. And 300 body bags were coming back every week at one point, and they were showing the body bags coming back and the caskets, and it just had a profound effect. It changed the average person's mind.
Now, we have to remind people that the war started before Lyndon Johnson's term. You said it had been raging for 15 years,
Right.
Earlier with advisors and later as troops were deployed. So Lyndon Johnson's attitude about the war was what?
Well, I think he was confused about it for a long time, but he did not want to lose it. It was really important to him to win the war, and it colored everything he did. People tried to talk about any kind of a settlement, and he wouldn't do it. He was interested in winning the war. That was his. And once he got into it, he didn't have a lot of options, and that was the one that the only one he wanted. He had no other option. He didn't want to, and that affected when he left office too. He wanted someone to come into office that would continue his war policy and wouldn't end the war and make him a loser, basically.
So Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey became teammates in 1964, following the assassination of Kennedy, when Lyndon Johnson ran in his own right. What was the relationship like, and how was this period for Senator Humphrey?
Well, the intensity in Vietnam started almost at the exact same time that he became vice president. The Tonkin Gulf resolution, the Tonkin Gulf incident in the summer in Vietnam of '64, there was a resolution in Congress that LBJ asked for, and it was passed, and Humphrey signed onto that. He wasn't yet vice president, as did Gene McCarthy and others. And then the convention came later in the summer, and Humphrey became vice president, and so he walked into the beginning of Johnson's real involvement with the war. Campaigned all during the fall, and they really never talked about Vietnam in the campaign. The campaign was more about Barry Goldwater being trigger happy and being Humphrey and Johnson were the peace candidates, and Goldwater was the war candidate basically. And so, but Vietnam really wasn't talked about. They were talking more about nuclear.
In '64.
In '64, yeah, they were talking more about nuclear, annihilation and nuclear war. And so they won by a landslide, 44 or 50 states. And so in the spring, in the early part of the year when they were in office, there was another incident in Pleiku in Vietnam, and Johnson called a cabinet, sort of an ad hoc cabinet and advisor meeting.
I'm bluffing that I don't have a good hand.
To bomb
I'm about to
Vietnam
bluff.
in retaliation, and he asked people around the table what they thought of this. And everyone pretty much agreed.
I just don't want to scare him
It's
away.
not a good idea, and he backed off. And he had
Trying to
written
hook him in.
Johnson a
1K,
memo earlier
and
before
then
he was vice
here's-
president, saying we should not get involved, shouldn't send ground troops
I don't have a
in,
whole
shouldn't
lot
bomb. This is not a good idea.
Oh, somebody
both for you
left. He didn't
politically,
even
for the country.
fold,
People
he
will
just
understand it. So he spoke up again at this meeting. Johnson got angry. Humphrey went back
That
and
is,
wrote another memo, a long, detailed one, and sent it to him. And at that
definitely
point, he was
mostly
completely
mine.
frozen out of any discussion of Vietnam.
Well, we have our first two video clips in the program to show you. First is 1964, and remember that Lyndon Johnson had been operating without a vice president when he came into office after the Kennedy
So I'm
assassination.
definitely up.
So there was a great deal of speculation going
in
into
the-
the convention
in the
about who his
black
choice would be
by,
to run in
300%
1964.
right now.
Here is a
Just
film from
as
the
far as
64
this
convention as Lyndon
particular
Johnson
sit-down, and
announces
then
his choice for vice president.
For today, I'm in the red, rather,
Vice President of the United States,
or I'm in the
my
red,
close, my long
200K,
time,
and then I'm just trying to work my way back down to 20% of winning a big 6 million.
my trusted colleague,
I 180 chips on this hand. I don't know what I'm sitting here for. I should have made the playback speed a lot faster because
couldn't help but think at that particular moment how far we'd come. All of the hard work and effort
Wait, did I
that we
just
put
get some
in through
extra
those
money
many
for
years. This
no
was
reason?
a great moment in my life.
Mr. Johnson said in his judgment, Mr. Humphrey was the best man to be president in case anything happened to him. No longer is the vice presidency just another job.
Well, that video, we should tell you, and much of the video you're going to see tonight is from Mick Coet's documentary on Hubert Humphrey, The Art of the Possible. I want to thank you for letting us show it to our audience tonight. Lots to follow up there. First of all, the scenes of the energetic Hubert Humphrey addressing the crowd and having the crowd eating out of his hands, and then the cutaway to Lyndon Johnson, who just didn't seem to share the moment. What was happening there?
Well, he didn't like the, obviously didn't like the spotlight being taken from him. And Humphrey generally believed to be a better public speaker. So he was just a little bit upset about Humphrey.
I just folded it straight
but, you know,
so I could type this.
he was that way. That was Lyndon Johnson. That, by the way, the
Someone else has it
Goldwater,
straight.
Not Senator Goldwater part
I'll
of the
say
speech. It was written by a number of
YouTube
people.
search
That
David
speech was written by
Ciccone.
Bill Moyers. He wrote that
YouTube.
back and forth. And there was a call and response kind of thing that really kind of caught on. That was an early one of that kind of speech and worked really well.
The call and response.
Yeah, not Senator Goldwater, and then they would,
Right.
you know, there was crowd to respond.
It was also Senator Senator Humphrey had ambitions for the presidency for quite a while. He toyed with it in '52, made a real bid in '60, and here he was finally at that convention accepting the vice presidential nomination. You could see how excited he was about the moment. He earned the nickname the Happy Warrior. He loved politics, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. He loved politics, and he got in trouble later for calling it the politics of joy, which is what he was about. He was joyful about politics, and he believed it was a way to do better in the country, to change the country, and he believed in it in a very innocent and we might think naive way, but it was really an innocent way. He believed in the country, believed in the American people, believed in one at a time and all American people at once. He really believed in our system, and so that was a way for him to change the country if he could.
Well, another clip, and this is later on in 1974 when Hubert Humphrey was gathering material for his memoir and made audio tapes, and we're going to use some of those throughout the program. But he talks a bit, and this is just one example of the relationship that you referenced and how it really became very testy between Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey as the administration wore on over Vietnam. And he reflects on some of the ways that Lyndon Johnson used the powers of the office, the perks of the office, to keep his vice president under control.
I don't know what to say.
Well, there wasn't a time that I ever got a plane
a
that I
voice
didn't
chat
have
link
to
if I
ask.
could.
And believe me, if anybody would ever tell you that Johnson was extravagant, it surely wasn't with his vice president. Many times he would say to me that it was better to take a smaller plane. He said, if you have a
come
plane
on.
that's too big, there'll be too many people want to ride with you.
Come on,
Encumbered with
dude.
Too many people who see that there's an
That ain't
extra seat
it.
that hasn't been used. And so from time to time,
You
on
ain't
short
all that.
trips, particularly up and down the Atlantic seaboard, I would take a King Air, a Beechcraft King Air or Queen Air, one of the smaller.
Oh, you know what? That's not a good idea because he'd be able to see what cars I have if he saw that my YouTube video.
For our long
You ain't all that.
we used the Jetstar. Never within the continental limits of the United States did we ever use Air Force 1 or 2, that is the 4-engine jets. Those were reserved only, those were to be used by me only for overseas trips. And at no time was I ever permitted to bring a newspaper man or a person of the media, radio, television, or press, with me on any trip within the United States. The President forbid it, and of course I respected his command and his wish. I gather he felt that the Vice President should be heard and seen, but not reported upon too much.
Of course, Lyndon Johnson had been the majority leader in the Senate when Hubert Humphrey had been serving there. These two men had a long relationship and served in leadership together. Could you talk more about how Johnson used the levers of power to control Hubert Humphrey?
Well, as I was saying earlier, when he had this argument with Johnson about Vietnam, Johnson shut him out, froze him out at that point for at least a year about any talk about Vietnam or any foreign policy, basically. He cut off his privileges. He shortened his staff. At one point, he tapped his phones. And he did
That ain't
a
it,
number of
Blake.
things to
That ain't
basically
it.
to control Humphrey. And he didn't want him speaking out against Vietnam. Didn't want him speaking out about anything that Johnson might have, didn't want him to speak about. Basically, he wanted to keep him quiet. And he had a way of calling them my planes, my boats. And he had this. Johnson did this sort of possessive, kind of attitude about these, as if they were his and not the American people's. So he was very much in control of that. And Humphrey dealt with it a lot. There were times when he gave 3 or 4 speeches in 1 week, and he had to call and get permission for each plane for each speech for that week. So it was worse during that period. That freeze lasted about a year, and then Johnson sent him to Vietnam.
Did Hubert Humphrey talk about how he reacted to this? He had to have been unhappy.
He was miserable for a long time during this freeze in particular, because Johnson was basically shutting him out of the inner circle, of his inner circle. So he was kind of on the outside, and he wasn't happy during that time because he wanted to be involved in what was going on. It was a bad time for him. But then he went back. He was sent to Vietnam a year later, and things changed in 1966.
We are going to walk around this exhibit tonight and give you some sense of the exhibit that's been put together here, showing the year 1968 with the focus on politics and our stops. And I wanted to remind you about your participation. In about 10-12 minutes, we're going to start taking telephone calls. Here's how you can do it. If you live in the Eastern or Central time zones, our number 202-737-0001. If you live in the Mountain or Pacific time zones, our number is 202-737-0002. And we really look forward to your comments on 1968, tumultuous year in American history, and the year in which Hubert Humphrey was a contender for President of the United States. Why don't you walk along with me, and we'll go to our next stop here. So how'd you first get interested in Hubert Humphrey?
Well, I grew up here, so he was always in the air when I was a kid. And I spent some time working here, and I saw his archive, and the archive was just fabulous. For a documentary filmmaker, that's, of course, gold mine.
The Humphreys had 4 children. Are the children still here? Are they active?
His daughter is no longer alive. She died a couple years ago. His grandson, Buck, is more involved in politics than the others. The sons are basically in sales, all of them. And Hubert, his Skip, Hubert III, his son, works for an advertising agency, I believe. So none of them are really in politics at this point.
Well, we are at the exhibit about the politics, the political life of Hubert Humphrey, which really was his life, but he wasn't born in Minnesota.
No.
Where was he born?
Born in Dolan, South Dakota. It was about 90 miles from the Minnesota border into South Dakota, in one of those little railroad towns that dotted the South Dakota prairie, that went along the prairie. And he was born in 1911, and it was a remarkable little town. Sort of an intellectual ferment going on there. His father was a druggist. His mother was a Methodist, sort of a social gospel person. So he got the politics in his father's drugstore and her social Methodist, social gospel kind of feel. So he got it from both sides. And sort of, as Bill Moyers calls him, the great combination of the preacher and the politician. He got both sides.
He went to pharmacy school himself. So how did he end up in politics?
He went to pharmacy school largely for a job. He always really wanted to be in politics. He did it in a year, a short time, with his father with the drugstore.
Feeling hot.
I don't think he ever really wanted to be a pharmacist for life.
He ended up getting a doctorate, as I understand, in political science?
Nope, he got a master's degree.
Master's degree?
Yeah, at LSU.
And what were his intentions? Why was he studying politics?
Well, initially he was going to get a doctorate. He was going to come back to the University of Minnesota, get a doctorate and teach. That was his first idea. And then he was so good at public speaking, and he was so good at communicating, that a lot of people around him convinced him to run. And I guess deep down he probably really did want to run. So he ended up coming back to Minnesota and becoming mayor of Minneapolis. That's where he first started.
And when did he serve as mayor? And what was the city like then? Do you know?
Well, he came back to LSU from the South, from grad school in 1940. And Minnesota had been a Republican state, and they'd never elected a Democrat to the Senate. And the reason why was because the non-Republicans were the Democrats and the Farmer Labor Party. He helped to unite those two parties into the Democrat Farmer Labor Party and built himself his own political base. And then that's how and the city was corrupt and bigoted and all kinds of problems with segregation and things. And when he first came, Nation magazine called it the capital of anti-Semitism in the United States. And when he left, he got an award from the National Council of Christian and Jews for the things he did.
Talk a little bit about the DFL. Is it still active in
Oh, yes.
Minnesota
Yep.
politics
Yep.
today? And,
Yep.
and Hubert Humphrey was really its founder.
Well, he was one of 2 or 3 people, but he was probably the greatest negotiator of the group.
And
he,
what does it stand for? How?
Democrat, Farmer, Labor Party.
But
but
from an ideology standpoint, how does it distinguish
Well-
itself from the Democratic Party?
Feeling
I
hot.
don't know that it does anymore, but at the time, it was a group of farmers and laborers, obviously, who had probably differences. Well, it's a complicated story, but they probably had differences with the more professional sort of Democrats that were, the FDR Democrats. There was a split there, and they just didn't like each other. And Humphrey was one of the people that finally, convinced them that they're never going to win an election unless they get together. And the Democrat Farmer Labor Party at one point, I believe, had 1/3 of our legislature.
He ran for Senate when?
He ran for Senate in 1948 after the speech.
Successfully. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that
Right.
speech. But I have a clip, not from them, but from 1960 when he first seriously thought about running for president. And this is just one of those joy of being a politician of Hubert Humphrey. Let's watch.
How do you think your race is going?
Well, like this roller coaster, it's been an uphill fight.
Uh-huh.
But I think we've been doing quite well.
Now, would you mind telling me what has been the most exciting part of the campaign so far?
I just had it.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, I tell you, this is good fun.
Thank you,
And
sir.
politics ought to be fun.
Yes, sir.
So vote for Hubert Humphrey, the president for you and me.
And there we see Hubert Humphrey just enjoying life. Did he bring this to his politics all the time?
All the time. Yep. That was pretty much the way he ran. And he would light up a room. I mean, people that had met him would say that it would be 11 o'clock at night and he would get off the plane and work till 3 in the morning and everybody was asleep and he'd still be like that. He could just do it. He could just run like that constantly. And he loved what he was doing.
And what were some of his other characteristics? I've read that he was known for talking a lot, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. But he was also a good listener. People miss that part. He did talk a lot. He in his speeches, he would come with a prepared speech and put it down and just talk for an hour. He knew a lot about a lot of different subjects. Really intelligent, an astounding memory. They figured at the time that he maybe knew 5,000 to 10,000 people by first name.
What a politician's gift
It
to
really
be
is,
able
yeah.
to remember
He
names
could go to a
like
town,
that.
meet somebody, go back 5 years later, remember their name, their family's name, what they did for a living. I mean, remarkable memory.
Well, we're going to start taking some calls, and then we're going to learn a little bit more about his political philosophy and how he developed it. First up is Kurt in Copley, Ohio. Kurt, welcome to our conversation about Hubert Humphrey.
Well, thank you and good evening, Ms. Swain, and it's a wonderful program to be participating in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you mentioned 1948, and I remember hearing.
Oh, I gotta come back. I'm a late
on
bloomer.
YouTube and on the internet of an actor named Ronald Reagan who endorsed Hubert Humphrey in 1948 for the U.S. Senate. Which were they? I mean, when you think about it, were they kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, even though they were both Democrats at that time? But also, I wanted to find out what Hubert Humphrey's relationship was with Barry Goldwater in the U.S. Senate versus what their private life was like. And also, did Hubert Humphrey and Jack Kennedy get along very well when they were running against each other for president in 1960 and in 1956 when they actually vied for the vice presidential nomination to run with Governor Adlai Stevenson, who ultimately they lost to Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee.
Right. Thank you so much, Kurt. Well, we're
On a farm. They just ripped each other apart in these back-to-back speeches, and someone drove through town later in the day and saw them having dinner together.
And
So
this-
they were
and-
good friends.
This, if you could talk in general, Kennedy is next, but before we talk about Kennedy specifically, about the United States Senate, these are the times of very big names of the senators. People recognize the names from history books even today. And was there bipartisanship? Did people work across the aisle? Talk about what the Senate was like.
Absolutely, it was disagree without being disagreeable. That was really what was going on. There was a lot of camaraderie. Humphrey was friends with a lot of Republicans. He was friends with even some of the Dixiecrats who he differed with. He was friends with some of those people, and it was a different.
Man, dude, anyone have
it was more
two pair?
cordial, and I believe there was more camaraderie than there is now. But I'm not in the Senate now, but I can tell you that they were pretty close. Those people, they worked closely together.
JFK and their relationship.
JFK's relationship through the early years in the Senate, Humphrey, they voted together on many of the same bills. Humphrey helped
feeling
in
hot,
farm
though.
legislation because he knew nothing about it. The relationship changed dramatically in 1960 during the
Not
election,
really, actually.
during the primaries. And the election.
In what ways?
Well, they fought.
Might
they had
fold
these
this
debates in the
hand.
election, in the primaries in Wisconsin and West
Well,
Virginia, and they got to know each other that way.
Finna take
And
a
then,
shot at the pot.
When Kennedy became president, Humphrey gave him many of his ideas to use in his administration. And the Washington Post had called Humphrey the idea factory for the Kennedy administration because he had so many of the ideas. The Peace Corps, for instance, is one of
Hubert Humphrey's
ideas.
the Peace Corps.
Oh, yeah.
Let's take a call next from Indianapolis. This caller's name is Jerry, and you're on the air, Jerry. Welcome.
That ain't
How you
it.
doing now, sir? I love your show, but I got a question for the man. Back in 1968 and 1948, was Humphrey spending more time with on the civil rights movement with Dr. Martin Luther King and Kennedy and Humphrey and Lyndon B. Johnson?
Yes, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about his civil rights. In fact, why don't we get into that part on his worldview by showing a clip. This is from your film, The Art of the Possible. This is early in his career, which Humphrey talks about his view of the world and his brand of liberalism. Let's listen. All right,
Are you talking about on the YouTube video? I'll say, type in my YouTube chat. Type in my YouTube chat.
So, you know, it was inciting. It was amazing. I don't know no one can really come up with a reason, but it certainly was there.
Let's go to another call. This one's from Andrew, watching us in Newburgh, New York. Andrew, you're on. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. How you doing?
Great, thanks. Your question?
I was hoping that you could comment a little bit on the relationship between Senator Robert Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey.
David won 28K with a pair of KK Queen Jack 9.
To 1968 when they were, vying for the Democrat presidential nomination.
Okay. RFK relationship.
The RFK relationship started really in 1960. We didn't really have much of a relationship with him before that.
Joined January 2020. Unknown.
But he learned to like Robert Kennedy. They learned to be friends.
I'll say, it's a lady. She's a winner.
In 1968, they had a meeting in May in early 1968.
She's a winner.
And they agreed that
Oops.
if Humphrey got the nomination, Kennedy would support him. If Kennedy got the nomination, Humphrey would support him. So he was a
She's a winner. The kind you like to flaunt and share a dinner.
Next up is Ron in Everett, Washington. Welcome to the Humphrey discussion now.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to jump back forward to the 1968 campaign again. Can you elaborate? In my recollection, President Johnson actually, in some ways, tried to scuttle Humphrey's effort. And of course, that was one of the closest elections, popular elections in history. And
She's a lady. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. She's a lady.
Could you elaborate on that? Thanks.
Did Lyndon Johnson try to scuttle his bid for the White House?
Well, he never helped him. He didn't help very much till the very end. And
She's a winner.
where he had Nixon at the ranch, and then the next day he had Humphrey at the ranch.
That GoFundMe group GoFundMe not large enough.
And part of the belief is among historians is that Johnson believed that Humphrey might end the war and make it look bad as legacy, and Nixon might continue the war. And he might have very well been for Nixon until late in the campaign when Nixon played a few dirty tricks, and then he came out for Humphrey at that point. They thought he might lose Texas.
She's a winner. The sort.
But pretty much during the whole campaign, he was
The sort you'd like to flaunt.
So from the 1948 entry of Hubert Humphrey, and he built his campaign on this, the denouement really came in
And share a dinner.
1963 and 64. When civil rights legislation was being put forward. Tell that story, if you would.
Well, Humphrey's involvement is as the Democratic whip in the Senate, and you've got LBJ as president, trying to basically the inheritor of President Kennedy's mantle, President Kennedy's efforts to get civil rights legislation passed. But Kennedy, there was some doubt about his commitment to this, what he was willing to, the price, was he willing to pay the price in terms of the Southerners who would oppose it. But after the Kennedy assassination, Johnson expressed sort of a recommitment to get this done in honor to President Kennedy.
Does he make Humphrey the point man on this?
Humphrey becomes the point man in the Senate. Mike Mansfield is the Senate Majority Leader, a Democrat, but it's Hubert Humphrey, the man who the man who has been persistent in terms of
Still owe me 80%.
as part of the Democratic
Still owe
who really takes up
me
the
80%.
and he's up against it because the rules were different then.
Still owe 80%.
To no end, and basically, I believe the numbers are like something like 67 votes were required in order to end the filibuster. And if you look through history, there are very few points at which you get enough votes to end the filibuster. But certainly, it's exceptional that you would get enough votes to end a filibuster on any piece of civil rights legislation. That's almost unheard of. And it takes a great deal of effort by Hubert Humphrey to hold off a Republican effort to just prolong this filibuster, and finally he's able to do it. I think he only gets something like 4 votes in excess of the 67 that are needed in order to call an end to it. And then, of course, what's interesting is, you know, the legislation couldn't even be put through the normal channels, because if it had been put through the Judiciary Committee, you would have run into none other than Senator Eastland. So it's kind of extra judicial process being put in place by Mansfield, but then engineered by Hubert Humphrey, and then the bill gets its overwhelming passage.
What were the opponents to civil rights constitutional arguments?
Well, the constitutional argument largely states rights, that we have a right to run our businesses, for instance, in a public place. We have a right to allow whoever we want in. You know, that the Constitution allows us to do that. Well, of course, that was one of the main arguments. But there were a number of them. But I wanted to say too that the Dixiecrats were really probably the biggest obstacle for him. He had a number of Republicans that were on his side. In fact, it was a coalition of Republicans and Democrats that made it happen, because they had the other Dixiecrats in the Democratic Party, and those people were just, you know, there was no way you're going to change any of their minds.
take a call from Jimmy.
I have a website. I just search voice chat, no download, no registering. Oh, did I just fold a two pair? Oh, come on, dude. That ain't it.
I am Jimmy Wolford. I'm the fellow who's Hubert Humphrey.
I just Google search voice chat, no download, no register, and there's tons of websites that are like they're like Discord or FaceTime or Facebook Messenger, and it's really like a YouTube comment chat, but just with voice, and it's also video, and it's the best way to set up conference calls.
Coal mines, and Hubert Humphrey came back in here. He heard me sing on a radio station in Williamson, West Virginia in 1960. He gave me $25 a day to travel with him, and Teddy White wrote a book called The Making
I'm gonna cover up that avatar.
And Teddy